Hey, did you know that there's games that aren't made by Nintendo? Yeah, I know. Weird. Me neither. Maybe Nintendo should look at those and try to learn some stuff? Metroid Prime 4 is one of the most anticipated games coming to Nintendo Switch, second maybe only to the Pokemon 2019 RPG. This because, well, Metroid Prime is a beloved series that people enjoy and has a great formula that we've only experienced 3 times at this point, with the last of those 3 times being over a decade ago. In those 15 years, there's been a fair amount of games that aped the Metroidvania foundation and iterated on it, much in the way that games like Skyrim learned from the foundation that the original Legend of Zelda built. Then some years later, Zelda returned the favor of borrowing from a game that it inspired with the release of Breath of the Wild. This practice ensures that the medium we love stays familiar enough to have its nostalgia-fueled claws in us, and it guarantees that it never has a chance to get stale. We get just enough of what we enjoyed about a game's predecessor without falling into the trap that all too many popular franchises developed in a vacuum fall into: stagnation. With that said, it's hard to just look at Metroidvanias developed in the modern day as inspiration, because ultimately, a game in a novelty genre like that, or roguelike, or Souls-like, inevitably end up staying so close to the original formula, with a few key changes that co-opting those changes could leave that game feeling completely soulless if the game that inspired its creation then borrows the distinguishable features. Basically, what I'm saying is, there are games that aren't Metroidvanias that Metroid could stand to learn a lot from, because those games didn't set out to be a newer version of Metroid. Of course, Samus is never completely helpless, so recent survival horror games like Amnesia aren't exactly apt comparisons, but there should definitely be a sense of unease. Sure, Samus can protect herself, but she's still on a desolate planet by herself, unknown life forms, so on and so forth. Something that time also afforded to games similar to Metroid Prime in many aspects is the improved ability to entrench you in a world, establish a vibe, and have that vibe influence inertia through the game. A trademark attribute of Metroid games has been the stripping of abilities to allow for the player to feel their progression, and to facilitate the kind of progression the series is known for: ability-based progression. One thing I think these games are missing is an improved atmosphere. Being the sole adventurer on an unknown planet with missing or a damaged means to protect yourself should feel a lot more eerie and unsafe. I think Metroid Prime 4 should be a bit survival horror-ish towards the beginning and become more and more action-driven as you improve your skills. The Tomb Raider reboot showed a bit of what this could work like. When you first take control of Lara, she struggles to defend herself against murderous adversaries and is shaken by the death she causes in that desperation. As you play the game, she becomes a lot more confident in those abilities and handles the repercussions a lot better, if at all, really. The thing I think Metroid can take from this, perhaps even improve on, is not only the feeling of mechanical progression, but also the narrative growth. This is the 4th game in the series, so it's not as much as a given that we could begin the game in this way, or at least if we pick up from where 3 left off. Something I think would be a good idea is if we begin Metroid Prime 4 in the way the latter 2 Uncharted games begun. Beginning the game with a younger Samus Aran would allow for 2 things that I think could be excellent ways to reformat the Metroid formula. Rather than trying to think up some reason to arbitrarily strip Samus of her equipment and or skills, they could begin the game with a series of flashback sequences that ease you into the gameplay in a similar way. Just a way that I think would flow a lot better, and a way that could simultaneously catch people up on what's happened up until this point. Not everyone has experienced the original games. I would be willing to bet that most people that will end up buying Prime 4 haven't experienced the first 3. Even in the seemingly unlikely event that Nintendo ports those games to Switch, which I totally think they should, there's still a slim chance that a lot of those people, if not most of those people, just skip straight to Prime 4 anyway. One other drawback of the Metroid Prime hiatus is the fact that a fair amount of the controls and mechanics are bound to feel dated when held up against similar games of today. Some of these things will be remedied just by switching to a more modern controller. I've talked about this a fair amount in my Smash Brothers videos, but even if you haven't seen those, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that there's a contingent of gamers that uphold the opinion that the GameCube controller is the best controller of all time. I think those people are insane. The GameCube controller is objectively limited in comparison to the current modern controllers. There are less button inputs because of the lack of any sort of left bumper or clickable analog sticks. The button hierarchy isn't ideal for every game, nor are the analog sticks. Is it the best controller for some GameCube games? Probably. Is it the best for every game? Definitely not. I'd say Metroid Prime is among those games. Really, no games like it would be played at their best on a GameCube controller. Now, of course, Metroid is not a shooter, it's an action-adventure game, but combat will primarily be done through shooting. Therefore, similar controls to shooters would be ideal. Dual full analog sticks would feel a lot better for controlling Samus than with a C-stick. And with all of that said, some people are of a completely different opinion even still when it comes to Metroid. A lot of people think the Wii Remote affords the most control over Samus, this because of the sensor and motion aiming. I think the Nintendo Switch allows everybody to reach a happy medium. We will almost certainly see a Splatoon style aiming setup wherein you can use both traditional methods and motion aiming in tandem with each other. This would allow for the increased button inputs I mentioned, which would make it possible to easily introduce some new abilities that can be mapped to those additional inputs, all while having access to the added control that motion affords. I've often likened motion aiming in shooters being akin to a third analog stick. You get to make sweeping movements with a lot more accuracy and ease than you could with just two actual analog sticks. A lot of people are against using motion at all. I think that's a bit ridiculous when they work well, especially since they usually think this because they don't want to flail around their controller when playing a game. If you're playing well, you won't need to. Motion aiming requires small movements. The big sweeping movements are done with the analog. Motion is for accuracy, and even if that isn't a good enough explanation for you, the beautiful thing is that this control method is optional. Doom illustrated how this could work well on Switch. Breath of the Wild demonstrated how this could work well on Switch. Fortnite's motion aiming can use some work. But either way you slice it, Metroid Prime 4 would stand to gain a lot from games like Splatoon or Doom. Speaking of Doom, I think a major takeaway that and other popular Bethesda games demonstrate is FPS games can still be immensely successful as single player only, or at the very least single player focused games. Sure, online multiplayer is a huge selling point. There is quantifiable evidence that earning potential for games that are multiplayer minded is greater than single player only experiences, but big budget single player experiences with tons of polish have proven to have a special kind of value, especially for hardware manufacturers. These games are prestige pieces. They're the games that marketing can shout about from the rooftops to allure people into buying their system. The big single player games bring people in. The multiplayer games are to keep people busy in the lulls. Metroid Prime 4 though should stay single player because, well, it makes sense narratively. There's one Samus, other than Dark Samus, but you get the point. The series is about seclusion. You're out on a desolate planet, not in a populated Marine Corps. That would be the obvious reason to stay single player, but it also has reason to be elevated in marketing as the game everyone needs to see and the game that you need to own, Switch to play. This would be the case for a multiplayer game, but that value is finite. They lose that distinction as people lose interest, which lowers the player base and diminishes the playability. Single player games are evergreen. People can and will be playing games like Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War 4, Spider-Man PS4 for years to come. They will get top billing in all marketing campaigns. Halo 5, on the other hand, doesn't have that evergreen quality. Gears 4 doesn't have that quality. Of course, the exception would probably be games like GTA 5 and soon to be Red Dead Redemption 2, but not every dev is Rockstar. Those cases are definitely anomalies. This blends into my final point. I think they need to double down on the cinematic aspects of this game. It should feel like a high-budget blockbuster experience. Grand set pieces, a memorable voice cast. Please be better than the talent that we saw in Other M, a great story on the level of some of the work you've seen coming out of PlayStation's dev teams. These things would all contribute to that prestige piece description. This game may not sell like crazy, but it is guaranteed to generate hardware sales if it's a must-play game. Much in the way that Zelda Breath of the Wild sold well, it too was and is a prestige piece. Good games sell consoles. Metroid certainly isn't the biggest IP in the world, but if they put their all behind it and make it a big game that everyone is talking about, it will be worth the time, money, and effort. But those are my thoughts. What do you think Metroid Prime 4 can learn from more modern games, if anything? Let me know that and more in the comments down below. If you like this video, be sure to like the video and share it with a friend who also likes Metroid Prime 4, is curious about how it will play, and also, you know, just wants to see it. Check out our website for content that you will not see here. Subscribe to this channel and ring the bell for more videos like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. New podcasts every Saturday, also at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That's on a different channel. Subscribe to that. Description has the link. Okay, that's it for me. See you next week.